Lonely Lakota Lumberjack paid $2 for woman with sack on head. Marries her when she says name.
In the deep woods of South Dakota, far from the noise of towns and cities, lived a Lakota lumberjack named Thomas Red Elk.
He was a man of the forest, strong and steady, with hands calloused from years of chopping wood and building his own cabin. His life was simple, quiet, and lonely, shaped by routines that left little space for anything else. He rose with the sun, carried water from the nearby stream, and spent long hours swinging his axe among the towering pine and oak trees. The forest was his world, and he knew every twist of the river, every hollow in the old trees, and every path where the deer wandered. Breaths. Yet despite the beauty and peace around him, Thomas often felt a gnawing emptiness. He had no family to share meals with, no friends who understood the rhythm of his solitary life. Most evenings he would sit by the fire, the glow casting shadows across the wooden walls of his cabin, wishing for someone to talk to, someone who could understand the quiet spaces in his heart. Thomas had always been a man of routine. Each morning, he would wake before dawn, eat a simple breakfast of bread and tea, and then set out into the woods with his axe slung over his shoulder. He knew how to survive in the wilderness, how to track animals, how to find edible plants, and how to light a fire, even in the heaviest rain.
His neighbors in the small town nearby respected him, though they often said he was a bit too solitary.
He did not mind their whispers. He had lived alone for so long that the company of trees and birds was enough, or so he told himself. But deep down he yearned for human connection, for laughter, for the simple warmth of another soul beside him at night. One crisp autumn morning, Thomas decided to visit the nearby town to sell some of his freshly cut timber. The town was small, just a few streets lined with wooden shops and a market square where people gathered to trade goods and hear the latest news. As Thomas walked along the familiar path, he noticed the changing colors of the leaves, brilliant shades of red and gold swaying in the wind. The air was cool and carried the scent of smoke from chimneys and the faint sweetness of apples from the market stalls. Thomas liked these trips into town. They broke the monotony of his forest life and reminded him that there was a world beyond the trees, even if he only passed through it briefly. At the market square, Thomas set up his stack of timber near the edge of the square. He greeted the few townspeople who stopped by, offering a nod or a quiet word, and soon a few people were inspecting his wood, weighing the planks and checking their quality. It was during this busy morning that he noticed her. She stood at the far end of the market, completely still, her face and body hidden beneath a rough sack. No one else seemed to pay much attention to her, and Thomas hesitated at first, unsure if he should approach. There was something unsettling yet compelling about the woman with the sack on her head. She didn't move, didn't speak, and didn't react to the bustle around her. She simply waited, silently, as if she belonged to a different world altogether. Curiosity tugged at Thomas. He had seen many things in his life, but nothing like this. The woman was small and slight, her posture tense but calm. People whispered quietly as they passed by, speculating about why she was there, but no one dared ask her directly. Thomas could sense her vulnerability, and at the same time there was a strange strength about her, a quiet determination that made him want to know more. Something inside him told him that this encounter was not by chance. He had always believed that life had a way of bringing the right people together, though he had never expected it to happen in such a peculiar manner. As he watched her, a man approached the woman, speaking softly in a voice only she could hear. Thomas overheard part of the conversation and was shocked to hear about a small payment, just $2, for her presence. His first instinct was disbelief. How could someone allow a person to be treated like an object, as though a human life could be measured in coins? He felt a surge of anger, but it was tempered by caution. He did not want to act rashly. Yet the thought of leaving her there, alone and silent under the sack, filled him with unease. He remembered the lonely nights in his cabin, the emptiness that gnawed at his heart. Perhaps it was this sense of shared isolation that pushed him forward. Without thinking too much, Thomas stepped closer and offered the $2. The man hesitated, surprised by the lumberjack's quick decision, but eventually accepted. Thomas handed over the coins, and the woman, still under the sack, followed him obediently. No words were exchanged. Her steps were light, almost careful, and she seemed to trust him, or at least understand that he meant no harm. The townspeople watched in quiet curiosity, but Thomas did not care about their stares. His mind was focused on the small bundle of mystery walking beside him, each step carrying questions he desperately wanted to answer. The journey back to his cabin was quiet. The crunch of fallen leaves under their feet, the only sound. Thomas tried to imagine what her life had been like, what had brought her to this strange moment in the market. The forest seemed to welcome them as they entered its familiar paths, the towering trees forming a protective canopy overhead. Thomas spoke softly, telling her about the woods, about the cabin, about how he lived. He hoped his words would comfort her, though she did not respond. Still, there was a sense of understanding between them, a shared recognition that they were both outsiders in a world that did not always make sense. When they arrived at his cabin, Thomas opened the door and let her in. The warmth of the fire greeted them, filling the room with a soft glow. He gestured toward a small chair near the hearth, and she sat, her movements careful and deliberate. He offered her some bread and water, which she accepted with a quiet nod. For the first time he studied her more closely. Her hands were delicate but strong, her posture proud despite her anonymity. There was an air of dignity about her that intrigued him even more. He wondered what her name was, what stories she carried beneath the sack, and why she had come to the market that day. Days passed, and Thomas continued his routines with the woman quietly observing. He chopped wood in the mornings, and she would sit by the fire, sometimes helping with simple tasks, other times simply watching. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was filled with a sense of mutual respect. Thomas found himself speaking aloud more often than he had in years, describing the forest, sharing his thoughts, even reading from old books he kept in the cabin. Slowly, he began to feel a connection, a gentle warmth that he had almost forgotten existed. Each day he discovered small details about her, the way her eyes reflected the light of the fire, the subtle grace in her movements, the careful attention she gave to even the simplest chores. Evenings were the hardest for Thomas. The loneliness he had carried for so long pressed against him more strongly when the forest grew dark and quiet. Yet the presence of the woman beneath the sack eased some of that emptiness. He did not know her name, her story, or her past, but somehow her silent companionship was enough to make the cabin feel alive. He found himself imagining a future, however uncertain, where they could exist together in the rhythm of daily life, where the forest and the cabin were not just places of survival, but of shared comfort and quiet joy. Thomas often wondered what had brought her to this point. Had she run away from a life she could not bear? Was she hiding from someone, or had she simply lost her way in the world? He did not know, and he respected her silence, believing that she would reveal her story when she was ready. In the meantime, he focused on what he could control, providing food, warmth, and safety, allowing her to become accustomed to the cabin and the quiet life of the woods. And in doing so, he discovered something profound about himself, the capacity for patience, empathy, and a quiet courage that went beyond the strength of his arms and the skill of his hands. By the end of that first week, Thomas realized that the presence of the mysterious woman had changed something in him. The loneliness that had been a constant companion was no longer as sharp, replaced by a sense of anticipation and gentle curiosity. He did not know what the future held, whether she would ever speak or stay, but he felt a new kind of hope. Life in the forest, once predictable and solitary, now carried the possibility of connection, of understanding, of a story unfolding that neither of them could have imagined. And as he lay down to sleep that night, listening to the crackle of the fire and the whisper of the wind outside, Thomas felt a quiet excitement for the days to come, ready to discover the mystery and humanity that had stepped silently into his life past. Life in the forest cabin settled into a quiet rhythm for Thomas and the mysterious woman. Days passed slowly, marked by the regularity of chopping wood, fetching water, and preparing meals. Thomas gave her tasks he thought she could manage, such as sweeping the floor, organizing firewood, and helping with cooking. She moved carefully, deliberately, never speaking a word, yet there was an unmistakable intelligence in her actions. She learned quickly, adapting to the demands of forest life, showing patience and a quiet determination that impressed Thomas. Despite the strangeness of their first meeting, he found himself growing fond of her. Her presence brought warmth into the cabin that he had not felt in years. Thomas often watched her while she worked. The sack over her head hid her face, but not her gestures or posture. He noticed the way she moved with purpose, how she would pause and consider her steps before acting, and how she seemed to pay attention to even the smallest detail. Breaths. Sometimes she would smile faintly when the fire crackled or when the sunlight streamed through the window, but these gestures were subtle and fleeting. They were enough for Thomas to feel a connection, though he could not yet understand her fully. His heart, long accustomed to solitude, felt a cautious hope, a small spark that perhaps his life could be different. In the mornings, after chopping wood and tending to the cabin, Thomas would return to the warmth of the fire. He would speak aloud, telling her about the woods, about the paths he knew, about the animals that roamed nearby. He described the different birds and their calls, the patterns of the stars at night, and the changing seasons that shaped the land. He spoke as much for himself as for her, because hearing his own voice in the cabin no longer felt strange. She listened attentively, occasionally nodding or tilting her head, giving small signs that she understood. Though words were absent, communication passed between them in gestures, glances, and shared routines. Thomas found that silence, when shared in this way, could be as comforting as conversation. The woman's identity remained a mystery. Thomas did not press her, though curiosity tugged at him constantly. He wondered where she had come from, what hardships she had endured, and why she had allowed herself to be brought to him under such unusual circumstances. Sometimes he imagined her life before the market, imagining stories that might explain her actions. Best. Each day, however, reminded him that patience was necessary. He had learned through his years of solitude that rushing life led only to mistakes and regrets. Perhaps she would reveal her story when the time was right, and he resolved to wait, no matter how long it took. One afternoon, Thomas noticed a change in her behavior. She had been observing him more closely, watching how he chopped wood, prepared meals, and moved through the cabin. When he returned from the forest with firewood, she tried to mimic his actions, carefully stacking logs and arranging them neatly. At first, Thomas felt a mixture of surprise and pride. She was not only adapting, but also trying to participate in life as he knew it. This small effort, simple as it seemed, touched him deeply. He realized that, though she had not spoken a word, she was trying to communicate, trying to share a piece of herself in her own way. Evenings in the cabin became a time of quiet companionship. Thomas would sit by the fire, and she would sit opposite him, sometimes helping with small chores or simply watching the flames. But he would read aloud from old books he had collected over the years, stories about people, places, and events beyond the forest. The woman listened, occasionally reacting with small movements, tilting her head, touching the pages, or running her fingers lightly along the edge of a book. Though she remained silent, her interest in the story showed a curiosity and intelligence that Thomas admired. He felt a bond forming, a connection that needed no words, only understanding and shared time. Despite this growing connection, Thomas struggled with moments of doubt and concern. He worried about her past, about the circumstances that had led her to the market with a sack over her head. But he feared for her safety, wondering if someone might come looking for her, or if the world outside the forest would treat her unfairly. Sometimes at night he would lie awake listening to the wind through the trees, imagining the dangers that might exist beyond the cabin. But he resolved to protect her as best he could, to provide shelter, warmth, and safety, even if he did not yet understand her fully. Their routine was interrupted one morning when Thomas decided to take a trip to town. He needed supplies: flour, salt, sugar, and a few tools he could not make himself. This was the first time he had considered bringing her along. At first, she hesitated, stepping back as though unsure of the outside world. Thomas smiled gently, trying to reassure her. "Bay," slowly, carefully, she followed him along the familiar path to the town. Thomas noticed how alert she was, how she observed the surroundings, the people, and the sounds of life beyond the forest. He felt a mix of pride and protectiveness, realizing that she was learning to navigate the world outside the cabin, one cautious step at a time.
In town, Thomas went about his errands while she remained nearby, keeping close but silent.
Townspeople stared at the woman with the sack over her head, whispering quietly among themselves. But she did not flinch. She seemed calm, composed, and aware of her surroundings. Thomas could sense the curiosity and judgment in the eyes around them, yet he did not let it bother him. He focused on gathering what he needed and on the small comfort of having her beside him, even in this unfamiliar environment. By the time they returned to the cabin, Thomas felt a renewed appreciation for her courage and resilience. Back in the forest, life resumed its quiet rhythm. The woman began to take more initiative, helping with chores without being asked, learning to chop small pieces of wood, and assisting in preparing meals. Thomas noticed small details about her habits, the way she arranged her tools, how she kept the cabin tidy, and how she reacted to the changing weather. These moments, though simple, revealed her character: resourceful, careful, and thoughtful. Thomas began to feel a deeper respect and admiration for her, realizing that their bond was growing stronger each day, built on trust, patience, and silent understanding. One evening, as the fire crackled and the wind whispered through the trees, Thomas spoke softly to her about the forest. He told her stories of animals he had observed, of storms that had shaped the land, and of the quiet beauty that only those who lived closely with nature could understand. She listened intently, nodding slightly, occasionally touching a log or stirring the fire. Thomas realized that she was learning from him, not only about survival but also about life in this secluded world. Though she had not spoken a word, her presence was a gift, bringing warmth, companionship, and a sense of shared purpose to his once lonely existence. As the days turned into weeks, Thomas began to feel a strange mixture of hope and anxiety. He did not know her name, her past, or even whether she would ever speak, yet he felt a deep connection to her. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was filled with understanding, trust, and a growing affection that Thomas could not ignore. He wondered if their meeting had been fate, a chance encounter that had brought two lonely souls together in a way neither could have predicted. He felt a quiet excitement for what the future might hold, even as he respected the mystery that still surrounded her. Thomas often reflected on his life before she arrived. The loneliness he had carried for years, the quiet emptiness that had seemed unchangeable, now felt different. There was a sense of possibility, a recognition that human connection could exist even in the most unexpected circumstances. He realized that love, trust, and companionship could grow slowly, quietly, and without words, and that patience and respect were as important as affection. The woman with the sack on her head had brought more than mystery into his life. She had brought the chance for a new beginning, a shared life, and a quiet joy that he had never imagined possible. And so, life continued in the forest cabin. Thomas and the woman settled into a delicate rhythm, their days marked by work, learning, and shared silence. Though her past remained unknown and her identity hidden, the bond between them deepened with each passing day. Thomas felt a cautious hope, a growing belief that their lives were connected in a way that could endure. He did not know what challenges lay ahead, what secrets might be revealed, or when she would finally speak. but he was ready to face them all, confident that their shared time in the forest had already begun to shape a story that would change both of their lives forever. The days in the forest cabin passed with a comforting rhythm, yet a quiet tension lingered beneath the surface. Thomas could feel it, though he could not name it. Each morning he rose before the sun, readying himself for another day of work in the forest, while the woman with the sack on her head moved silently about the cabin, assisting with chores and learning the ways of the woods. Her presence had grown natural to him, yet there was still a mystery that both intrigued and puzzled him. He wanted to know her, to understand her story, yet he also knew that patience was required. Some secrets could not be rushed, and some hearts could not be forced to speak. Thomas had begun to notice small gestures that revealed her personality. She had a gentle curiosity about the world, noticing details that Thomas himself might overlook. She would linger near the window watching birds hop along the branches or pause by the stream to examine the movement of water over stones. Sometimes she would arrange flowers or small pieces of wood in careful patterns, a quiet form of expression that told Thomas more about her than words ever could. Oh, he still did not know her name. He felt a growing admiration for her intelligence, her patience, and her quiet strength. Despite her silence, a subtle bond was forming between them. Thomas found himself speaking more freely than ever before, telling her about his past, about the people he had known, and about the years he had spent alone in the forest. He spoke as much to relieve his own loneliness as to share information with her. Bet. She listened attentively, moving deliberately, performing small tasks while keeping her attention on him. Occasionally she would tilt her head as if considering his words, or she would smile faintly, a small gesture that filled Thomas with a sense of hope and warmth. One day as Thomas worked in the forest chopping wood, he noticed that she had followed him part way, carrying a small bundle of firewood. She moved with surprising strength and determination, placing each piece carefully in the pile near the cabin. Thomas stopped to watch her, feeling a mix of surprise and admiration. She was capable and diligent, proving that she was more than just a quiet presence. She was a partner, someone who could share the burdens of daily life. For the first time, Thomas felt a sense of equality in their relationship, a recognition that despite the mystery surrounding her, they could work together as equals. As the days passed, Thomas began to include her in small decisions about life in the cabin. He asked for her opinion on how to organize the firewood, where to store food supplies, and how to care for the small garden he had planted near the cabin. She responded not with words, but with gestures, pointing, arranging, and moving objects to show her preferences. Thomas found that these silent interactions were surprisingly effective. They allowed them to communicate without pressure, without expectation, and without the fear of misunderstanding. He realized that a connection based on trust, respect, and shared labor could be just as meaningful as one based on words alone. Despite this growing familiarity, there were moments when Thomas felt the weight of uncertainty. He did not know where she had come from, why she had been at the market with a sack over her head, or whether she had left a past behind that might someday catch up with her. Sometimes he imagined the dangers she might have faced, the struggles she had endured, and the courage it had taken to survive.
His thoughts often wandered at night as he lay by the fire listening to the wind in the trees.
He wondered whether she would ever trust him enough to share her story, and he resolved that he would wait as long as it took, no matter how patient he had to be. The mysterious woman began to show small signs of personal expression that went beyond her chores. She would hum softly while working, a quiet tune that Thomas could barely recognize but that filled the cabin with warmth. She arranged flowers and small objects carefully, creating patterns that revealed a sense of order and creativity. Sometimes she would pause to watch the sunlight through the trees, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were savoring the simple beauty of the world. Thomas watched her with growing admiration, realizing that her silence did not indicate emptiness, but rather a quiet strength and depth that he had never encountered before. One afternoon, a storm rolled through the forest. The wind howled through the trees, and rain fell in thick sheets, drumming against the roof of the cabin. Thomas worked to secure the windows and gather firewood, while the woman moved calmly inside, preparing food and maintaining the fire. Her actions were deliberate and precise, revealing her resourcefulness and resilience. Thomas could not help but feel grateful for her presence, for the way she had seamlessly become a part of his life, even without words. The storm raged through the night, but the cabin remained a place of safety, warmth, and quiet companionship. As the storm passed and the forest returned to its usual calm, Thomas reflected on the changes in his life since the mysterious woman had arrived. He had once believed that his solitude was unchangeable, that the forest would always be his only companion. Now he realized that connection could grow in unexpected ways, even with someone who spoke no words. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for her presence, for the way she had brought life, warmth, and hope into his cabin. The silence between them was no longer a void. It was a space filled with understanding, trust, and a shared rhythm of life. One evening, Thomas decided to test the limits of their silent communication. He set up a small table by the fire and placed a few objects on it: a cup, a small knife, and a piece of cloth. He pointed to each object and demonstrated its use, then stepped back and allowed her to try. She moved carefully, mimicking his actions, showing both skill and attention to detail. When she completed the task successfully, Thomas felt a surge of pride. Though she had not spoken a word, he understood that they were learning from each other, building a silent language of gestures, actions, and shared understanding. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day. Thomas found himself anticipating her movements, understanding her intentions, and appreciating her presence more deeply. He no longer saw her as a mystery to be solved, but as a companion, someone who had chosen to share her life with him in a quiet, meaningful way. Oh, the forest, once a place of solitude, had become a home filled with connection, understanding, and a slow, steady affection that neither of them had expected. Thomas also noticed that she had begun to engage with the world outside the cabin, in small but significant ways. She would look out the window at the forest, observing animals, plants, and the changing seasons. She began to take initiative in preparing meals, maintaining the cabin, and even planting seeds for the garden. These actions were her way of expressing herself, of participating in life alongside Thomas, and he appreciated each one. He began to see her not as a silent passenger in his life, but as a partner, someone who shared the responsibilities, joys, and challenges of living in the forest. As winter approached, the bond between them deepened further. The forest became colder, the days shorter, and the nights longer. Thomas and the woman spent more time indoors, tending the fire, preparing food, and sharing the warmth of companionship. He found comfort in her presence, and the quiet understanding that had grown between them. Though she still had not spoken her name, he felt that a connection had formed that transcended words. They had built a life together in the forest, one marked by shared labor, mutual respect, and the silent acknowledgement of each other's presence. One morning, Thomas awoke to find her sitting by the window, watching the first snowflakes fall. He joined her, and together they observed the quiet beauty of the forest, transformed by winter. He felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that despite the mystery of her past, they were together in this moment, connected by trust, understanding, and an unspoken bond. He realized that life had a way of surprising even the most solitary of hearts, bringing companionship, warmth, and hope in the most unexpected ways. As the days grew colder and the snow deepened, Thomas and the woman settled into a new rhythm. They worked together to gather firewood, prepare food, and maintain the cabin, finding comfort in the familiarity of shared routines. Their connection, built on trust and silent understanding, continued to grow stronger. Thomas felt a growing affection for her, a sense of love that did not need words to be understood. Though her identity remained a mystery, he knew that they were building something lasting, a bond that could withstand the challenges of life in the forest and beyond. In the evenings, Thomas would often speak softly to her by the fire, recounting stories of the forest, his childhood, and the lessons he had learned from a life spent in solitude. She listened attentively, responding with gestures, glances, and subtle expressions that conveyed understanding, curiosity, and a quiet connection. Thomas realized that their relationship was not defined by words alone, but by the shared experience of life, work, and mutual respect. In the quiet moments, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment, knowing that he was no longer alone, and that the mysterious woman had become an integral part of his life. And so, life in the forest cabin continued, marked by quiet routines, shared labor, and a growing bond between Thomas and the woman with the sack on her head. Though her past remained unknown and her words unspoken, they had found a connection that transcended silence. Each day brought new moments of understanding, trust, and companionship, shaping a life together in a way that neither of them could have imagined. Thomas felt a cautious hope for the future, confident that the bond they had built would guide them through whatever challenges lay ahead, and that the quiet life of the forest had become a life shared, meaningful, and filled with the possibility of love. The forest had grown colder with the approach of late winter, and the cabin that Thomas had built years ago now felt warmer and more alive than ever. The fire burned steadily in the hearth, casting a golden glow across the walls and illuminating the careful movements of the woman with the sack on her head. She had grown more confident in her tasks, chopping small logs, arranging supplies, and helping Thomas in ways that made the cabin feel less like a solitary shelter and more like a home. Each day, Thomas noticed her actions and small gestures with growing admiration, realizing that she was not only capable but also intelligent, thoughtful, and full of quiet strength. Thomas had come to rely on her presence in ways he did not fully understand. Her silence, once strange and puzzling, now brought a comforting rhythm to his life. He had grown used to speaking aloud while she worked, describing his thoughts, recounting stories from the forest, and even sharing memories from his own past. She listened attentively, responding not with words, but with gestures, expressions, and actions that conveyed understanding. Thomas found himself opening up to her more than he had to anyone in years, sharing thoughts and feelings that had long been buried under the weight of solitude. He felt a growing connection, a sense of trust and companionship that filled the quiet spaces of his life. One afternoon, Thomas decided it was time to venture back into town for supplies. The forest had become more challenging with the snow, and they needed flour, sugar, salt, and other essentials. He looked at the woman with the sack and gestured that she should come along. At first she hesitated, pausing at the edge of the cabin as if uncertain about leaving the forest behind. Thomas smiled gently and encouraged her, his hands showing patience and understanding. Slowly, she nodded and followed him down the familiar path to the town, her movements careful but deliberate. As they walked, Thomas noticed how she observed the world with careful attention. She watched the patterns of the snow on the branches, the tracks of animals in the forest, and the small details of the landscape that he sometimes overlooked. Her awareness of the environment impressed him, and he felt a deep sense of respect for her. She was learning quickly, adapting to new situations, and showing a quiet courage that Thomas admired. He realized that this woman who had appeared so mysterious and distant was becoming an indispensable part of his life, a partner in ways that went beyond words. In town, the townspeople stared at the woman with curiosity and whispered quietly among themselves. Thomas ignored them, focusing instead on gathering the supplies they needed. She followed closely, moving with calm precision, observing the people, the stalls, and the bustling activity. Thomas could see that she was taking mental notes, learning how to navigate this world beyond the forest. Her presence in town drew attention, yet she did not flinch or react to the stares. Thomas felt proud of her composure and resilience, realizing that she was adapting to life outside the cabin while maintaining her dignity and strength. When they returned to the cabin, Thomas noticed subtle changes in her behavior. She had become more assertive in her actions, helping with chores without being asked, and taking initiative in ways that made the cabin run more smoothly. She arranged the firewood carefully, cleaned the cabin with precision, and even prepared small meals on her own. Each action reflected her growing confidence and her desire to participate fully in their shared life. Thomas watched her with a sense of wonder, realizing that the woman with the sack on her head was not just a silent companion, but a partner who shared in the responsibilities and joys of living in the forest. One evening, as the fire burned warmly and the wind whispered outside, Thomas decided to test the limits of their silent communication. He set up a simple game of observation and imitation, placing objects on the table and demonstrating how to use them. The woman watched carefully, then copied his actions with remarkable accuracy. When she completed the task successfully, Thomas felt a surge of pride and satisfaction. Though she had not spoken a word, he understood that they were developing a language of gestures, actions, and shared understanding that went beyond words. Their bond had grown deeper, rooted in mutual respect, patience, and the quiet acknowledgement of each other's presence. Despite the growing connection, Thomas still wondered about her past. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why had she allowed herself to be brought to him with a sack on her head? He asked himself these questions often, yet he never pressured her. He knew that trust could not be forced, that some stories had to be shared in their own time. He resolved to continue providing safety, warmth, and companionship, believing that the right moment for her to speak would come naturally. And as he watched her move about the cabin, performing her tasks with care and attention, he felt confident that she was beginning to trust him, that she was ready to reveal parts of herself when the time was right. Winter passed slowly, and the days grew longer with the approach of spring. The snow melted from the trees, and the forest began to awaken with life once again. Thomas and the woman worked together to prepare the cabin for the changing season, gathering supplies, planting seeds, and repairing parts of the cabin that had been worn by the winter storms. The woman's efficiency and careful attention impressed Thomas, and he often found himself marveling at how capable she had become. Though her name and her story remained unknown, her presence had transformed his life in ways he could never have imagined. One afternoon, as they were tending to the garden, Thomas noticed something different in her demeanor. She paused in her work, looking toward the distant hills with a thoughtful expression. Thus, she reached out to touch a budding flower, then turned to Thomas and gestured for him to come closer. "Curious!" he approached, and she placed her hands together in a way that seemed to indicate a question. Thomas realized that she wanted to communicate something important, something she had kept inside for a long time. He knelt beside her, encouraging her silently to continue, and waited patiently, trusting that she would reveal her message in her own way. It was that evening by the fire that the moment finally came. The woman removed the sack from her head. Thomas's heart raced as he saw her face for the first time. She was beautiful, not in a way that demanded attention, but in a quiet, natural way that reflected strength, resilience, and kindness. Her eyes met his, steady and calm, and she spoke a single word, her voice soft but clear. Her name. The sound of it filled the cabin, and Thomas felt a wave of relief, joy, and connection wash over him. She was no longer a mystery, but a person with a past, a story, and a name. And yet knowing her name did not diminish the bond that had formed between them. It only strengthened it, giving Thomas a deeper understanding of who she was and what she had endured. She began to share fragments of her story, slowly and carefully. She had come from a distant place, escaping circumstances that had made her wary of trust. The sack on her head had been both a symbol of her fear and a shield against the world she did not yet feel ready to face. She had allowed Thomas to guide her, to provide safety and companionship, and through that trust she had found a new beginning. Thomas listened with empathy, understanding the courage it had taken for her to come this far, and he felt a profound respect for her resilience. As she spoke, Thomas realized how much he had come to care for her. The mystery, the silence, and the small gestures that had marked their early days were now replaced by understanding, mutual respect, and shared experiences. They had built a life together in the forest, one rooted in trust, patience, and quiet companionship. The revelation of her name and past did not change the connection they had. It deepened it, adding layers of meaning, empathy, and love. That night, as they sat by the fire, Thomas reflected on the journey they had taken together. Bay saddened. From the moment he had seen her at the market, standing silently with a sack on her head, to the day she had revealed her name and story, he had learned the value of patience, trust, and understanding. He realized that true connection did not require words alone. It required presence, care, and the willingness to share life, even in silence. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for her courage, her trust, and her companionship, knowing that their bond was strong enough to endure whatever challenges lay ahead. The forest around them seemed to reflect the change in their lives, but the snow had melted, the trees were budding with new growth, and the air was filled with the sounds of life returning to the woods. Thomas and the woman moved together in harmony, their actions synchronized, their understanding of each other deepened by weeks of shared experience. The cabin was no longer just a shelter. It was a home, a place of warmth, trust, and the quiet joy of shared life. They had discovered a bond that transcended mystery and silence, a connection that promised hope, companionship, and love. Thomas knew that their journey was only beginning. Though they had overcome the initial uncertainty and fear, there would be challenges ahead. Adjusting to life together fully, navigating the outside world, and continuing to understand each other's pasts. Yet he felt confident that the bond they had forged, built on trust, respect, and patience, would guide them through whatever lay ahead. He looked at her, her face now free from the sack, and felt a profound sense of hope and joy. For the first time in years, he believed that life had brought him exactly what he had been longing for: companionship, understanding, and a chance to love and be loved in return. And so, as the fire crackled and the forest settled into the quiet of the evening, Thomas and the woman sat together, sharing a new beginning. They had come far from the day they first met, from the mystery of a sack on her head to the revelation of her name and her courage. Their bond had grown stronger with each passing day, and though the road ahead was unknown, they faced it together, ready to build a life filled with trust, love, and the quiet joy of companionship in the forest they both called home. Spring had fully arrived in the forest, painting the world with soft green leaves, colorful flowers, and the gentle hum of life returning to the trees and streams. Thomas and the woman, now known to him as Elenita, had grown closer with each passing day. The cabin, once a quiet place of solitude, now felt alive with laughter, shared routines, and the warmth of companionship. Though their journey had begun with mystery and silence, it had transformed into a life filled with trust, understanding, and the quiet joy of being together. Thomas often marveled at how fate had brought Elenita into his life, and he felt a deep gratitude for her courage and patience. Their days followed a comfortable rhythm, yet each day held small adventures and discoveries. Bonus. Thomas would rise early to chop wood and tend the cabin, while Elenita prepared breakfast and helped with the morning chores. Together they would walk through the forest, collecting herbs, examining the tracks of animals, or simply enjoying the beauty of the land. Sometimes they would sit by the stream, letting the water wash over their hands, and talk quietly about their lives, their hopes, and the simple joys they had found in each other. Thomas cherished these moments, knowing that they were building a life together that was strong, meaningful, and full of love. As their bond deepened, Thomas began to consider the future more seriously. He had spent so many years in solitude, never imagining that he would find someone who understood him so completely, someone with whom he could share not only the hardships of forest life, but also the simple pleasures of companionship. He realized that he wanted more than shared days and routines. He wanted a life fully intertwined with Elenita, a life in which they could grow old together in the cabin that had become a home for them both. Elenita had become an integral part of his world. She was no longer the mysterious woman with a sack on her head. She was a partner, a confidant, and a source of joy and inspiration. Her quiet strength and thoughtful nature complemented Thomas's own skills and experience. Together they had faced the challenges of living in the forest, the harsh winters, and the isolation, and in doing so, they had learned to rely on each other, trust each other, and care for each other deeply. The cabin, once a place of solitude, now echoed with laughter, conversation, and the quiet contentment of a shared life.
One day, Thomas decided it was time to propose to Elenita.
He wanted their commitment to be a formal expression of the bond they had developed, a promise to face the future together, no matter what it held. He thought carefully about how to do it, wanting it to be simple, heartfelt, and meaningful. On a bright spring morning, with the forest alive with birdsong and the scent of wildflowers in the air, he led Elenita to a small clearing near the stream where they often walked. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the ground, and the scene felt like a perfect reflection of the life they had built together. Thomas knelt on one knee, holding her hands in his. He spoke from the heart, telling her how much she meant to him, how her courage, patience, and kindness had transformed his life, and how he wanted to spend the rest of his days by her side. Elenita listened quietly, her eyes shining with emotion. When Thomas asked her to marry him, she smiled, a slow, radiant smile that filled Thomas with joy and relief. She nodded, speaking the single word he had longed to hear. Yes. In that moment, surrounded by the forest that had witnessed their journey, they promised to spend their lives together, bound by love, trust, and shared experiences. The news of their engagement brought quiet excitement to the small town nearby. Though Thomas had lived most of his life in the forest, the townspeople knew him well and respected him for his hard work and integrity. They were curious about Elenita, the woman who had come into his life in such a mysterious way, but they were also pleased to see him happy and content.
The couple planned a simple ceremony, one that reflected their values and the life they had built together.
It would be intimate, held at the cabin with only a few neighbors and friends in attendance, a celebration of love, trust, and the quiet beauty of their shared life. On the day of the wedding, the forest seemed to celebrate with them. The sunlight shone warmly through the trees, the birds sang in harmony, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. Thomas and Elenita stood together in front of the cabin, their hands intertwined, hearts full of emotion and gratitude. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. They exchanged vows, promising to care for each other, to face challenges together, and to build a life of love, respect, and shared joy. Friends and neighbors witnessed their commitment, and though there were no grand decorations or elaborate festivities, the day was filled with genuine happiness, laughter, and the quiet wonder of two lives coming together. After the ceremony, Thomas and Elenita returned to their cabin hand in hand, ready to begin the next chapter of their life together. The cabin, once a place of solitude, now felt complete. Every corner, every object, every familiar path in the forest had become part of their shared story. They worked side by side, tending the fire, preparing meals, and maintaining the cabin, their movements synchronized through months of shared experience. Even in the silence, there was communication, understanding, and a deep sense of connection that filled the space between them.
As days turned into weeks, Thomas and Elenita settled into married life with ease.
Their routines continued, but now they were infused with a deeper sense of partnership. Thomas no longer felt the gnawing loneliness that had once been his constant companion. Elenita's presence brought warmth, comfort, and a quiet joy that transformed each day into something meaningful. They would walk together through the forest, gathering wood, observing wildlife, and enjoying the beauty of nature. They laughed, shared stories, and supported each other through challenges, building a life based on love, respect, and the shared knowledge that they were stronger together than apart. The bond between them continued to grow, strengthened by the trials they had faced and the patience they had cultivated. Thomas often reflected on how his life had changed since the day he first saw Elenita at the market, standing silently with a sack over her head. What had begun as curiosity and a sense of responsibility had blossomed into a profound connection, one built on trust, understanding, and the shared experience of life in the forest. He realized that love could come in the most unexpected forms, that it could be nurtured through patience, kindness, and shared hardship, and that it did not always follow the path he had imagined. She had found a safe place, a partner she could trust, and a life where her presence was valued and cherished. Her courage and resilience had brought her to Thomas, and her willingness to embrace the quiet life of the forest had created a foundation for a deep and lasting connection. Together they had transformed the cabin and the surrounding forest into a home filled with warmth, laughter, and the quiet satisfaction of shared life. Seasons changed and the forest continued its cycles of growth and renewal. Thomas and Elenita experienced each season together, adapting to its challenges and celebrating its beauty. They planted gardens, harvested wood, and observed the wildlife with appreciation. Their lives were simple, yet deeply fulfilling. Each day brought moments of connection, understanding, and love that reinforced their decision to spend their lives together. The cabin, once a symbol of solitude, had become a testament to patience, trust, and the unexpected ways in which life could bring people together. One quiet evening, as the sun set and painted the forest in shades of gold and crimson, Thomas and Elenita sat together by the fire. They reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point, from the mysterious encounter at the market to the days of shared labor and silent companionship, to the revelation of Elenita's name and past, and finally to their wedding and the life they now shared. Thomas felt a profound sense of gratitude for every moment, for every challenge, and every triumph, knowing that their bond had been forged through patience, courage, and love. Elenita leaned her head on Thomas's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her. The cabin was warm, the fire crackling softly, and the forest outside whispered with the sounds of life. They did not need words to express the depth of their connection. It was present in every glance, every touch, every shared routine. Thomas knew that their lives had changed forever, that the loneliness he had once known had been replaced with a profound and lasting companionship, and that the mysterious woman with a sack on her head had become his partner, his confidant, and the love of his life. In the days and years that followed, Thomas and Elenita continued to build their life together. They faced challenges, as all couples do, but they faced them with patience, understanding, and a shared commitment to each other. The forest remained their home, a place of work, beauty, and peace. Their love grew quietly, steadily, and strongly rooted in the trust and experiences they had shared from the very beginning. And every evening, as they sat together by the fire, they were reminded that life could bring love in the most unexpected ways, and that the most profound connections often came from patience, courage, and the willingness to embrace the unknown. Together, Thomas often thought back to the day he first saw Elenita at the market. He remembered the strange curiosity he felt, the decision to pay $2, and the journey that followed. What had begun as a mysterious and uncertain encounter had grown into a life filled with love, trust, and companionship. The forest, the cabin, and the quiet rhythms of their shared life had become the backdrop for a story that neither of them could have predicted, but one that had brought them both happiness, purpose, and a sense of belonging.
And so Thomas and Elenita lived their days together in the forest, their bond unbroken, their hearts full, and their lives intertwined.
They had discovered the profound power of trust, patience, and love, and they faced each day with gratitude for the journey that had brought them together. Best, the lonely lumberjack and the mysterious woman with a sack on her head had found each other, and in doing so, had created a life that was rich, meaningful, and full of quiet joy. Their story, once filled with uncertainty and mystery, had found its happy ending, not in grandeur or spectacle, but in the simple, enduring beauty of shared life, mutual respect, and unwavering love.